Hey guys, tonight we wake up in a puddle of our own sweat, blood, or maybe just last night's wine beneath a sky that doesn't care if you live or die. We're stepping straight into Napoleon's army, a marching empire built on blistered feet, hollow bellies, and orders barked in 6 languages over the sound of cannon fire. This is the story of what it really meant to be one of Bonaparte's men. Forget the oil paintings. This is no grand parade. You are not polished brass and sharp creases. You're mud, lice, and toothache. You're a number in a column, a trembling figure beneath a tricolour flag, and you may not even make it through breakfast. Tonight, we trade dreams for frost-bitten fingers and glory for gangrene. Because you're about to find out exactly why you wouldn't last a day as a soldier in Napoleon's army. And yet this era changed the world. Empires burned, maps bled, and modern Europe was born screaming in the mud. So how did men endure it? Why did they fight? What did it cost? And what's left of them? In us. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you feel is cold. Not gentle, not biting invasive. It's a damp, crawling cold that has entered your bones and now refuses to leave. You don't wake so much as surface, like something drowned and dragged to the edge. Your breath rises in steam. You blink, and it hurts. You're sleeping in your uniform, or what's left of it. The grey-blue wool is crusted stiff with sweat, rain, and something darker dried blood, maybe yours, maybe not. The buttons dig into your ribs. Your boots, still on, are swollen with yesterday's march. Your feet pulse with a hot, blistered pain that somehow feels distant, numb. Like the cold is chewing its way through you. Around you, the field is dotted with lumps. Other soldiers, some snore, some cough, some don't move at all. And then the rattle of sabres. A distant clatter, horse bridles jangling, followed by the bark of a sergeant's voice. You flinch, conditioned like a stray dog. Orders in harsh French slash through the air, like bayonets. The camp's waking up, which means you have no choice but to as well. You sit up, and the world tilts. Hunger makes you dizzy. Your belly is a hollow drum. Your canteen is dry. Your lips are cracked and caked with dirt. You were dreaming about bread. Again. Nearby, a man is retching. Another squats and groans dysentery's got him bad. He curses in Corsican, then moans again. Someone laughs. You don't. You scratch under your collar and pull back a fingernail lined with something tiny and wriggling. Lice. You flick it into the grass. What's one more? Your musket leans against a rock. You grab it without thinking. It's not just your weapon, it's your ticket to rations, to pay, to survival. You clean it daily, not out of pride, but because if it jams in battle, you'll die before you get a second chance. Powder's precious. Bayonets are rusted, but sharp enough to gut a man. You've seen it. You've done it. Probably. You're not always sure what's memory and what's dream. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is doled out in silence. Hard biscuit. A strip of salted pork. Some men are lucky wine, maybe. Others trade. One crust of bread for a pinch of tobacco. A button for half a boiled turnip. Desperate currency. A man named Devoe offers you a deal. Your dry socks for a corner of cheese. You consider. But dry socks are life. You refuse. He shrugs, coughs blood into a rag, and walks off. You chew slowly. Your teeth ache. One of your molars cracked last week. It throbs now with every bite. There's no dentist. If it gets worse, someone will hold you down with their knee and dig it out with a blade heated over a fire. If you're lucky, they'll give you wine first. A drum rolls in the distance. Assembly. You shoulder your gear, a pack that weighs more than it should, and fall into line. There are hundreds of you. A river of blue-grey wool and leather, all moving as one. You don't know where you're going. You rarely do. Orders come down, and you move. That's the rule. The sun's coming up now. It's orange and cruel. You begin to sweat under your coat, even though you're still cold. The march starts. Mud sucks at your boots. Your musket bangs against your shoulder with every step. You try not to think about your feet, or your back, or your belly. You focus on the rhythm. Left, right, left. Right. An officer rides by, polished and clean. He smells like soap and something floral powder, maybe. His horse lifts its tail and drops a steaming pile beside the path. You look down. You envy the horse. A man in the line collapses. He's not dead, just spent. No one stops. The officers beat him until he stands. If he doesn't, they'll leave him. If they're in a bad mood, they'll make an example of him. You've seen that too. Once, a man feigned sickness. He lay down during the march. The captain rode up, pulled his pistol, and shot him through the head in front of everyone. Desertion, he said. No trial. No ceremony. Just brains in the mud and a message sent. You still remember the way the smoke curled from the barrel. You keep walking. Later, you pass through a village. The locals stare. Children hide. Women whisper. Men glare. You're not a hero to them. You're an occupier. Or worsey reminder of how fragile their safety really is. Some beg. Others spit. You don't blame them. A man hurls a rock. It hits a drummer boy. The boy stumbles, but keeps playing. His lip trembles. He can't be older than 12. By midday, your legs are lead. Your shoulders scream. You can't remember a time when you weren't tired. You start to fantasize about falling into a ditch, just to sleep, just to rest. But you keep going. You always do. Because if you fall behind, you're not a man, you're meat. The road stretches endlessly ahead, lined with broken trees and broken people. A wounded rider is passed by on a cart, arm in a sling, eyes blank, flies buzz around his face. He doesn't swat them. An old veteran beside you mutters something about Spain. He laughs, then goes quiet. You don't ask. Hours pass. At nightfall, you arrive at a new camp. Not much different than the last. Mud, grass, tents if you're lucky. Open ground if you're not. Fires flicker in the distance. You can smell boiling horse meat and your stomach cramps. Your feet bleed as you peel off your boots. You lance a blister with the tip of your bayonet and hiss through your teeth. The man next to you lights a pipe and offers you a puff. You take it, gratefully. It doesn't help, but it's something. A letter from home might help, but you haven't gotten one in months. You wonder if your family even knows where you are, if they care, if you'll ever go back. You curl up in your cloak, trying to ignore the pain in your legs, the itching in your clothes, the noise of coughing and crying and praying all around you. Someone nearby hums a lullaby. It sounds like a funeral. Your eyes close. But before sleep takes you, a distant sound rolls over the hills like thunder, but sharper. Artillery, and it's getting closer. The sun hasn't even risen, and already your body is screaming. You wake to a whistle through the camp, followed by the rattle of mess kits and the groans of men who've barely slept. Your back feels like it's been beaten with rifle stocks. Your feet, God, your feet. You dare not look at them again. The skin on your soles is soft, white, and peeling. Trench foot, they call it. Or rot. Doesn't matter. The pain is so deep now, it feels like part of your identity. A corporal kicks a man nearby who hasn't stirred. He jolts upright, gasping. Not from sleep, but from a nightmare. You recognize the look. You've worn it yourself. The orders come down fast. You march. No destination, no explanation. Just forward. You barely manage to stand, slinging your pack over your shoulder like a sack of bricks. Inside is everything you own. Your torn greatcoat, a piece of soap worn thin as a coin, a spoon, your last piece of thread, a rosary someone gave you but you no longer believe in, and a scrap of blanket. That's your life. And the musket, of course. It's heavier than it should be, almost 5 kilos of wood, iron, and dread. Your bayonet affixed, gleaming faintly in the dim morning light. It's meant for stabbing, not for shooting. You haven't fired it in weeks. Powder's short, and the officers want to keep you from wasting it. You're told to save your shot. Close the distance. Trust your steel. You don't. The column begins moving, and you're in it before you've even had time to relieve yourself. You adjust your belt, bite down on nothing, and start walking. Marching isn't just walking. It's a form of violence, on your body, on your soul. You move in ranks of 6, trudging through mud and over frostbitten earth, the soles of your boots slapping the ground in tired rhythm. The weight of your pack pulls on your spine like a demon. Your rifle bangs into your shoulder with every third step. And then there's the sound, hundreds of feet, the rustle of cloth, the occasional cough or groan. It's like being inside a sick beast's stomach, all breath and creaking bone. After the first hour, your thighs begin to burn. After the third, you lose sensation below the knees. By noon, you've already pissed yourself. So has the man in front of you. No one mentions it. The roads are riddled with holes from carts and hooves. You trip once, twice, catch yourself the third time with a jolt of pain in your hip that you try to ignore. Behind you, someone falls. The line doesn't stop. It never stops. There are wagons following the column, but they're not for the living. You pass one after several hours. It's stacked with bodies, wrapped in torn uniforms. Some are missing arms. One is staring up at the sky, lips parted like he's trying to speak. The smell hits you neck sweet and wrong, the kind of smell that invades your nose and stays there. You don't look again. Somewhere behind you, a man vomits. The officers bark orders now and then, but mostly they ride along the flanks, untouched by the mud, wrapped in cloaks of finer wool. One of them sings. You hate him for it. The midday ration is thrown at you from a cart. You snatch a hard crust of bread stale and full of weevils. You don't care. You bite into it anyway. The bugs crunch. The taste is bitter and mouldy. Some soldiers chew grass to fool their stomachs. Others pick through animal droppings, hoping for undigested grain. You once saw a man eat a boot sole boiled over a fire. Leather soup. You walk on. The terrain changes. Forest gives way to open plain. You pass through burned villages' walls, blackened, roofs gone, doors ripped from hinges. Dogs skulk around, ribs showing. They growl if you get too close. You keep marching. Your thoughts drift. You think of your mother's voice, the smell of stew, a lover's laugh. You try to hold on to it, but it slips away like breath on a window pane. All you really know now is pain. Another man collapses. The medics don't even check. They toss a coat over him and keep moving. You don't know his name. You shared a tent once. You march on. Rain begins in the afternoon. It's light at first, then heavier. The mud deepens. Your boots sink with every step. Men slip, no one helps them. Arms are slick with wet cloth. Water leaks into your pack. Your musket, soaked, grows heavier. You wipe the barrel out of habit, but it's pointless. Your coat smells of damp rot and unwashed flesh. You stink. You all do. But no one notices anymore. You're all pigs in uniform. You pass a stream and are told to refill your canteen. You bend over, scoop up the water, and drink. It tastes like copper. You see something upstreamer, dead mule, belly bloated, floating sideways. You drink anyway. You have to. That evening you reach high ground. Your captain signals a halt. Men collapse. Some sleep where they fall. Others stagger into small groups, lighting fires if they can find wood. You sit down, then immediately regret it. Standing again is agony. Your socks are soaked. You strip them off and see that 2 toes are black. You touch one. There's no sensation. Frostbite. You say nothing. Duvo sits beside you. His face is gaunt, lips cracked. He doesn't say anything, just smokes. He offers you the pipe. You take it. A younger recruit, not more than 16, stares at the flames like he's hypnotized. You hear him whisper the Lord's Prayer. He says it over and over until he finally falls asleep mid-word. You get a single piece of dried meat for supper. It's stringy and sharp with salt. You chew it for 10 minutes. You dream of beef, warm and thick, with fat dripping off a bone. Someone plays a harmonica. The tune is off-key, but familiar. A lullaby, a funeral march. It's hard to tell. A man cries nearby, not loud, just quietly, sobbing into his coat like a child. And you stare into the night, trying to ignore the way your heart pounds. You know what's coming. You've heard the rumors. Tomorrow were the next day, you'll see battle again. They say the Austrians are close. They say the ground will drink more blood than water. They say the emperor himself might ride among you. You lie down in the mud. Sleep doesn't come. But the next morning, it isn't the Austrians you meet. It's fear itself, in the form of smoke, metal, and madness. Because next comes the fire. The bugle sounds just after dawn. Not the gentle one. The other one, the one that means death is coming. You know its voice now, harsh and cutting, like a blade dragged across bone. You jolt upright. Your muscles protest, stiff and swollen, but adrenaline overrides them. You don't feel tired anymore. You feel wired, nauseated, and hollow all at once. The kind of feeling that comes before something breaks. Men are already assembling. Officers shout, forming lines. You fumble for your musket, your hands trembling. You check the flint. It's damp. You wipe it on your coat, then your sleeve, then your mouth. Useless. Powder's passed out, a single paper cartridge, tightly rolled, containing just enough to load and fire once. You tuck it into your pouch beside 3 more. That's your allotment for the fight. 4 shots. 4. The rest? Steel. You line up beside Duveau. His hands shake worse than yours. A younger soldier is throwing up behind a tree. He wipes his mouth with his sleeve and takes his place. The officers walk the line, shouting orders. Stay tight. Fix bayonets. Hold formation. Keep your eyes forward. Eyes forward. As if that will stop your hands from shaking. You affix your bayonet. The click of metal locking into place is louder than it should be. It's almost musical. You hear drums. Not your drums. Theirs. The enemy. Austrian troops. You see them over the rise grey and white coats, shakos, long lines snaking across the field like worms in the earth. Cavalry to their left, artillery on their right. They are precise, methodical, not yet human, just shapes. Then the cannons begin. The first blast sounds like the sky cracking open. You flinch. The ground shakes under your boots. A man 2 ranks over is struck directly. He doesn't scream. His body just detonates, raining hot meat and bone in a 10-foot radius. You're sprayed with something warm. You don't look. Don't look. Never look. The line moves forward. You march. This is not like the stories. There is no charging, no brave run. It's slow, deliberate, like walking into the ocean knowing you can't swim. Every few seconds, another cannon booms, dirt flies, bodies drop. You try not to step on the pieces. Musket fire begins cracking pops, rapid and scattered. Smoke fills the field. Thick, choking, white-grey clouds that sting your eyes and turn the air into soup. You can't see the enemy anymore. You can barely see your own hands. Then the order comes. Fire. You raise your musket, aim into the fog, and squeeze the trigger. Flash. Bang. Recoil. The weapon jerks in your hands. A shock jolts up your shoulder. Smoke blinds you. You don't know if you hit anything. You don't even know if the ball left the barrel. Doesn't matter. You load again. Bite the cartridge. Pour the powder. Ram the ball. Prime the pan. Close the frizzen. Too slow. Another cannon hits near your line. A man ahead is thrown into the air like a rag doll, one leg spinning away like a loose wheel. Someone is screaming. You reload. You fire again. Smoke, heat, fire, thunder. The Austrians are close now. You see them. Their human now faces twisted, shouting, charging. You hear the order. Bayonets. Your 4th shot is still in your pouch. There's no time. You grip your musket low, aim the steel point forward, and wait. The moment of impact is pure madness. The 2 lines crash together like beasts. Steel meets flesh. Men shriek, grunt, cry out in languages you don't understand. Bayonets sink into stomachs, blades scrape bone, blood flies. You are shoved, grabbed, swung at. You stab. You don't aim. You just thrust forward, hard, fast, again and again. You feel something give way, resistance, then collapse. A body drops. You don't know if it was friend or foe. A man swings his musket like a club. It connects with your jaw. Pain explodes across your face. Your ears ring. You fall to one knee. You taste blood. You lunge upward and stab blindly. Your bayonet enters soft, wet. The man gasps. You shove harder. He slumps. You pull the musket back and fall again, this time over a body. Hands grab at your legs. You kick. You scream. You scramble up and run nowhere, just away from the grasp. A horse screams nearby, a horrible, high-pitched sound. It collapses, its rider crushed beneath it. You see the rider's leg bending the wrong way. His mouth opens, but no sound comes out. You turn. You swing your weapon at anything that moves. You see Deveau. He's on the ground. A bayonet is lodged in his chest. He's still alive. He reaches for you. You stare. You don't move. You step over him. You don't stop. Smoke is everywhere now. Gunpowder, blood, burning hair. The heat is unbearable. It clings to your skin, gets into your eyes, your nose, your soul. Someone yells, "Retreat!" but no one listens, or hears, or cares. You run. You stumble. You swing your weapon like it's not even yours anymore. The ground is slippery with blood and bile. Men are sobbing, begging, bleeding. One tries to crawl away, intestines dragging behind him like ropes. You trip again and fall into the dirt. Your face lands inches from a man's head, his mouth open, eyes wide, throat cut. He looks like he was trying to scream when it happened. You roll over, gasp, gag, spit blood. Your vision tunnels. Your hearing fades to a hum. And then silence. It's over. Or at least, this part is. The enemy is retreating. The Austrians pull back. You're alive. Barely. You stand slowly, like a man much older than yourself. Your body feels like it's been beaten with iron rods. Your musket is gone. You don't remember dropping it. You look around. The field is a mass grave. Bodies lie everywhere twisted, broken, burned. Smoke rises in lazy spirals. Blood glistens in pools, black under the fading sun. You hear a scream, and then a shot. Someone's finishing the wounded. Mercy, they call it. You limp back toward what remains of your unit. A medic checks your face, says you've cracked your jaw, tells you to drink water, hands you a rag soaked in brandy. You wipe your face. The rag comes away red. You don't ask whose blood it is. Night falls. Fires are lit. Some men talk, softly, numbly. Others sit in silence, staring into nothing. One sings. A lullaby, maybe. You can't tell. You sit down next to a broken cart and close your eyes. You survived. But you don't feel alive. And now that you've fought, now that you've killed, the real question is, how do you live with it? Tomorrow, you'll have to find food, water, shelter, a way to make your body keep going. And that's the next battle. Your body wakes up before you do. Pain brings you back. Not a sharp pain, but a deep, soggy ache that touches everything. Knees, shoulders, jaw, ribs like your skeleton's gone soft, and every inch of it resents your existence. The sky is grey. Not just the skyvery thing is grey. Your fingers are swollen. You try to flex them and wince. You're cold, soaked to the bone. There's no sun, no birdsong. Just the faint coughs of other men, a distant cry, the squelch of boots in wet mud. You shift, and your stomach cramps. Hunger. Again. You'd forgotten about it during the fighting, but now it's back, roaring in your gut, curling your spine like a fist in your belly. You'd eat anything. You search your coat. Maybe you've got something left. A scrap, a crumb. Nothing. Someone nearby bites into an onion like it's an apple. You watch, you salivate, you hate him. Then you hate yourself for hating him. You rise, groaning. Your legs feel alien wooden things strapped to your torso. Your left foot is raw from marching. The blackened toe hasn't improved. You wiggle it. Still no feeling. The quartermaster yells something about rations. You join the line. You wait. You clutch your mess tin, dented and dull, and hope today's supply run wasn't ambushed. You've seen men go days without food, some weeks. Then they eat whatever they can, find rats, insects, bark. One man gnawed on a boot until he passed out from exhaustion. The line moves. The smell hits you first. Salt, grease, and something unidentifiable. By the time it's your turn, the pot is mostly blackened sludge. The cook scoops it out with a tin ladle and dumps it into your bowl. Soup is a generous word. It's mostly water, a film of oil on top, some lumps of bread that fell apart days ago, and a solitary piece of carrot floating like a drowned body. You eat it. You burn your tongue, but you don't care. You slurp it greedily, trying not to think about the black specks. Dirt? Ash? Something worse? Who knows? It fills the hole. Barely. You wipe the bowl with your fingers and suck them clean. You think of cheese. You think of roast lamb. You think of pastry with jam. You think of swallowing your own belt. Water comes next. You head for the stream, careful not to follow behind the sick ones. Upstream is safer. In theory. You bend down and cup the water with your hands. It's cold, clear, refreshing. You drink deeply. And in that moment, you gamble with your life. Because the water could be clean, or it could be laced with the waste of 100 men. Dysentery, cholera, typhus. They're invisible, silent. They wait in the water, in the food, in the very air you breathe. Disease is the real enemy. It doesn't come with drums or flags. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up quietly and starts killing. You've seen it. A man wakes up feeling fine. By midday he's sweating, trembling, voiding everything from both ends. By nightfall he's dead, his body wrapped in his own blanket, if he's lucky. Others live longer, but they're hollowed out by the time they recover. Yellow-eyed, trembling, half the man they were. You give them a wide berth, not because you don't care, but because you do. And caring will kill you just as fast. You wander the camp after breakfast. There's no order, no sanitation. Men relieve themselves wherever they can. The air is thick with the smell of Rothyman and otherwise. Horses, dead from exhaustion, are left to bloat. Their eyes gone, ribs poking through stretched skin. Flies swarm everything. You find a patch of dry ground and sit. You try to pull your boots off to dry your socks. They stick. When they finally come free, the skin beneath is white and puckered. You peel the sock off slowly and see the damage. Your foot's swollen. Red streaks crawl up the leg. Infection. You know what comes next. You've seen it. Men try to walk on feet like that. They fail. The foot blackens. The leg swells. Then someone comes with a saw and holds you down while they take it off. No ether, no chloroform. Just alcohol and prayers. And screaming. Always screaming. You rub the foot, trying to will circulation back into it. It doesn't work. Later, you pass the surgeon's tent. You don't go inside. You don't need to. The smell finds you first blood, sweat, iron, and waste. There are screams coming from within. A man limps out, supported by two others. His arm is gone. The stump is wrapped in linen and soaked through. He's pale. His mouth moves, but no sound comes out. Another man is being dragged in. He's conscious. You walk away. Even the strong get sick. Even the brave die, vomiting into the dirt. There's no glory in it, no trumpet, no speech, just a slow, painful unravelling. But if you're lucky, and very few are, you'll avoid it another day. Dinner comes, and it's the same as breakfast. Salted meat this time, so tough you have to chew it for 5 minutes before it softens. Still, it's food. You trade half your wine ration for a crust of black bread. It tastes like mould. You don't care. Wine is precious, not because it's good. It's not. It's sour and metallic, but it numbs. A cup of wine is a moment of silence, a breath, an eraser for the day. Some men hoard it, others barter it. A few drink all of it at once and pass out in their cloaks, dead to the world. You take small sips, slow and steady, and close your eyes. It doesn't make you full, it doesn't make you clean, but for a moment it makes you warm. Someone jokes that you should save your lice and eat them. You laugh, so does he. Then you both go quiet. You scratch your scalp and flick something away. Tomorrow, maybe a better ration will come. Maybe the supply wagons will arrive. Maybe you'll get real bread. Maybe you'll eat something that doesn't make your gut twist into knots. But you know better. The real feast here isn't meat or bread. It's survival. And that's earned bite by bite. And now that you've eaten, you face the one enemy you can't outmarch, outfight, or outthink. The night, the cold, and the desperate chase for rest. Because next comes the test of sleep. You'd give anything to sleep. Real sleep. Not the kind you've been having lately, fitful, shallow, haunted by distant cannon fire and the sound of boots you can't see. But it's not just the nightmares that keep you awake. It's everything. The ground is hard. No, worse than hard, unforgiving. Lumpy with rocks and roots, soaked with yesterday's rain and God knows what from the men who passed through before you. The earth stinks. Like wet leather and spoiled meat. Your bedroll is thin as paper. Your greatcoat might as well be a wet towel. You curl into yourself, knees tucked against your ribs like a dying animal, and still the cold gets in. The wind whistles through the trees. It carries whispers, or maybe that's just your mind playing tricks. You've heard stories, soldiers who woke in the middle of the night screaming about men they killed. Some don't stop screaming. Others just walk into the woods and never return. You don't scream, you just stay quiet, breathing slow, trying not to think. Sleep is for the rich, for the lucky, for the dead. The lice are most active at night. You feel them crawling behind your ears, in your waistband, in the seam of your trousers. You scratch, and it makes it worse. You stop, then start again. It's maddening. You try to wrap your cloak tighter. It's stiff with grime and soaked through from the march. It smells like everything you've endured. Smoke, sweat, rot, blood. You shiver. Not because it's cold, though it is, but because there's no such thing as comfort anymore. Not in your body. Not in your thoughts. Your muscles ache in ways you don't have words for. Your back is twisted from the constant weight of your pack. Your feet pulse with a sick, hot pressure that might be infection. You know you should elevate them. But there's no elevation in a ditch. You lie flat, trying not to move. Every movement brings a new wave of discomfort. One of your ribs may be cracked. It hurts to breathe deep. So you breathe shallow. A man next to you coughs wetly. He mutters something in his sleep words you can't make out. He clutches his chest and rolls over. You pray he's just dreaming. Because if it's real and he's coughing blood, that means he'll be dead in 3 days, maybe 2. And if he's close enough to touch you, that means it'll be your turn soon. You pull your blanket over your mouth and try not to inhale. You try to sleep, but the fire's gone out. No more wood. It burns too fast and is too scarce. You can't afford to send men scavenging anymore. Last time they went looking for wood, 2 never came back. Wolves, maybe. Or worse, deserters turned bandits. You don't ask. Without fire, the cold settles in like fog. It doesn't just touch you, it takes you. You lose sensation in your fingers. Your boots are still on, but your toes feel like ice chips. You flex them. Nothing. You slap your thighs. That helps. A little. You rub your arms. Your elbows creak. You try to count. You forget the numbers halfway through. The sky's still dark. Maybe midnight. Maybe later. Someone starts to moan. Then cough. then cry. You close your eyes tighter. Sleep. Please, sleep. You think about home. You think about the way the sun looked in your mother's kitchen, the warmth of bread, the feel of a wool blanket that didn't stink. You think of your lover's fingers tracing your wrist. You think of how far that all feels now, how it might not even be real. Maybe that life wasn't yours. Maybe it belonged to someone better fed, someone who still had skin between their toes. You hear a musket shot in the distance. Not a battle, just one, then silence. You don't ask what it meant. The answer doesn't matter. You shift again. Your bladder aches, but you're not getting up. You already peed once half asleep right there under your coat. You'll do it again. Everyone does. No one talks about it. You press your face into the crook of your arm. Your breath is warm there, moist. It fogs your skin. It's the only warmth you've got left. Another hour passes, maybe two. Time has stopped meaning anything. The stars above are dim. Cloud cover creeping back in. Rain's coming. You smell it. You want to weep, but your body's too tired to cry. Finally, sleep finds you. It doesn't ask permission. It grabs you, pulls you down, hard. You dream you're falling. You hit the ground. And then, morning. If you can call it that. You open your eyes. Your lips are cracked. Your fingers don't bend. Your foot pulses with fever. Your neck has a new ache. You've drooled into your sleeve, and your back feels broken in half. You've slept 2 hours, maybe 3. A blessing. Around you, others rise, groaning, limping, cursing the dawn. One didn't wake. The young one, from 2 tents down. He's still wrapped in his cloak, eyes open, lips blue. He froze. Quietly. No screams, no struggle. Just gone. You look away. The living shuffle past him, stepping over the body like it's another rock on the path. A corporal tosses him a spare coat, not for warmth, just to cover the face. The rest of you keep moving, because it's time again. Time to eat, if there's food. Time to march, if there's road. Time to die, if it's your turn. But it's always time for something. And while you struggle to sleep, the world outside your little nightmare continues marching, bleeding, dreaming. Entire ideologies, loyalties, and identities rise and fall while your foot rots in a boot. Next, we pull back. We widen the lens. Because you aren't just a soldier anymore. You're part of something bigger, something terrifying, something holy. While you struggle to survive under canvas and sky, the broader civilization that created you marches on in parallel, and it does not sleep. The world of Napoleon's soldiers, these battered ghosts, draped in blue and bound by oath, was not merely a military machine. It was a living belief system, a secular religion dressed in tricolour, singing the gospel of glory, empire, and equality through thunderous cannons and parched lips. To understand how you got here, how any man ended up in this hell, you must understand the code that shaped you. The values pressed into your flesh, not with sermons, but with drills, medals, and threats. At its heart was a promise. And that promise was simple. You matter. Not because of your birth, not because of your wealth, not because of your title, but because you wear the uniform, because you serve France. And France, they said, was not just a country, it was an idea. The revolution had torn down the old world. Kings had fallen, churches had burned, priests had fled. Into that vacuum stepped something wild and new. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Words carved into buildings, stitched into flags, and screamed into battle. For the first time in generations, a peasant's son could rise, and some did. Not many, but enough. Napoleon himself was born to minor nobility on a poor island. He rose through merit, through fire, through cunning. He was living proof that the old order was dead. And so they believed, or wanted to. But belief is not the same as comfort. The rank and file lived hard, they bled harder, yet they sang, yes-sang. They had anthems, chants, marching songs that tied them together like sinew to bone. The most famous, La Marseillaise, had started as a revolutionary hymn and became something else entirely, a war cry, a lullaby, a defiance chiseled in sound. Oh, arms, citoyens! To arms, citizens. And they weren't just words, they were a commandment. Officers were expected to fight at the front, not bark orders from behind. Medals were awarded not for lineage, but for bravery. The Légion d'honneur gleamed on chests blackened by soot and powder. A small strip of red silk could turn a nobody into a legend in his village. But the belief system ran deeper still. It wasn't just about glory. It was about meaning. Because when you're half dead from frostbite, vomiting from spoiled meat, and hauling a broken musket up an Austrian hill, you need more than orders. You need purpose. And the Empire gave it. Each soldier carried with him not just weaponry, but a narrative. He was part of something epic, a defender of liberty, a builder of nations, a spreader of civilization against monarchy, superstition, and decay. Of course, reality bit back. Freedom? Most of them had none. Equality? Tell that to the Polish divisions, paid less and fed worse. Fraternity? Ask the men who froze outside Smolensk, abandoned for strategic gain. But belief doesn't die easily, and neither did pride. Even the lice-covered, starving soldier, filthy and afraid, might look at a Russian serf and think, "At least I am French. At least I serve Napoleon." That pride was cultivated deliberately. Napoleon understood narrative better than most kings ever did. He crafted it like a playwright. He toured the camps, spoke to the men, called them "my children." He had a memory for names, or pretended to. He handed out eagle's gold-tipped battle standards that men would die to protect. And they did. He made them feel seen, important, immortal, even as they rotted from within. And when it came time to die, they died not with resignation, but with purpose. They whispered it to each other as they lay bleeding, "Vive l'Empereur," because, in this world, death without meaning was the greatest fear. But death for France, for Napoleon, that was transcendence. The code of the tricolour also demanded discipline. Desertion was met with a bullet. Cowardice? A firing squad. Disobedience? The whip, or worse. But loyalty? Loyalty could save you. It could feed you, promote you, make your name known back home. Some even got statues, though most got unmarked graves. This belief system didn't only exist on the battlefield. It seeped into daily habit show. Soldiers greeted each other, saluted, ate, prayed. You were expected to keep your kit clean, your boots polished, your musket oiled even, if you had no soap, no time, and no strength. Because appearance mattered. Because unity mattered. Because if one man faltered, the whole line might break. And when the line broke, the enemy didn't send apologies. They sent cavalry. Even in defeat, the system held. Men cursed the officers, laughed at their orders, mocked the food, but still obeyed, still fought, still died. Because they weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for an idea, a myth, a sense that their life, however short, had weight. And that weight was wrapped in 3 colors: blue, white, and red. But it gets worse. Because once that belief is planted deep, deep inside Ute, doesn't leave, even when the war does. Some men went home and wept for weeks, not because they were broken, but because they had lost their identity. The army had become their home. The code had become their religion. And peace? Peace felt like exile. But belief alone doesn't make a civilization. Not when half the world you left behind was built by the people you left in silence. Next, we ask, what of the women? What of the families? What of those who wait and grieve and fight their own wars with nothing but memory and bone? While the soldiers marched, bled, and died under cannon smoke and freezing rain, another army fought in silence, unarmed, often unnoticed, but no less essential. They did not wear uniforms or carry muskets. They wielded spoons, letters, whispers, prayers. They gave birth, buried sons, starved, waited, and sometimes never learned why. Because behind every soldier of Napoleon's army was someone left behind. A woman, a mother, a sister, a lover, a wife. And when you pull back the veil of battlefield smoke and look across France, across the villages, farms, cities, you find that the cost of glory was not just measured in musket balls and blood, but in wombs, tears, and absence. The Napoleonic Wars were a human meat grinder, consuming over 2.5 million French soldiers. Entire regions lost their men. Rural villages became hollowed-out husks, populated mostly by the elderly, the very young, and women who lived half-lives, waiting for footsteps that never returned. In many households, sons went off to war before their first shave. They returned, if they returned maimed, addicted to laudanum, empty-eyed, or not at all. Marriage during this period became a kind of lottery. You might marry young, be pregnant by autumn, and widowed by spring. Children were born without fathers. Widows remarried quickly, not because they stopped grieving, but because survival demanded it. A manless household had no protection, no income, no legal standing. In many places, a woman couldn't even keep land or manage an estate without a male guardian, unless she was widowed, and even then, barely. Napoleon himself enacted the Napoleonic Code, a sweeping legal structure that codified male dominance in the household and severely curtailed the rights of women. Under the law, wives were legally subordinated to their husbands. Adultery? A crime for her. Not necessarily for him. Divorce? Technically possible, but rare and stigmatized. In many ways, the empire modernized Europe's laws, streamlining property rights, bureaucracy, and legal clarity. But for women, the gains were slim. The shackles slightly redesigned, but still fastened. And yet they endured. They took over farms, managed shops, kept entire communities from collapse. They cooked with nothing, sewed with scraps, bartered for firewood, smuggled salt, sold bread at markets with coins made of melted spoons. They learned to cut corners, to stretch wine, to cheat hunger with boiled weeds and dried beet peel. They wrote letters, so many letters, thousands upon thousands of them, folded carefully, kissed and prayed over, addressed to regiments they hoped still existed, to husbands who might already be buried in a nameless field. Some of those letters made it. Many didn't. But still they wrote. They clung to handwriting the way others clung to relics. One ink-stained page could be the difference between hope and madness. And for some, the waiting was its own death. Historians have found dozens of accounts of women who kept a place at the table for 10 years, waiting for a man who never returned. Others entered convents, some took lovers, some sold themselves to survive. Others simply vanished from record unwritten casualties of a war that was supposed to liberate the people. And then there were the camp followers, the women, who marched with the army itself. Some were wives, others prostitutes. Some disguised themselves as men to stay close to husbands or brothers. They cooked, cleaned, mended uniforms, hauled water, sold their bodies, raised babies, born beside cannon wheels. They were despised and depended upon in equal measure. Officially, they were not part of the army, but without them, entire divisions would have unraveled. Yet they were denied recognition, denied rations, denied burial with honours. Their suffering was personal, not political, their blood invisible, and their silence expected. The rhetoric of the Napoleonic era glorified masculine virtues, bravery, duty, strength, sacrifice. Women, in this narrative, were to be muses, mothers, or martyrs. That was the Trinity. Napoleon himself said, "Nature intended women to be our slaves. They are our property." And yet he loved his mother fiercely, wrote passionate letters to Josephine until he didn't, expected loyalty, obedience, gentleness, but built a world where survival demanded ferocity. The contradiction was never resolved. It simply became culture. And even in death, women remained on the margins. Memorials to fallen soldiers sprang up across France. Few memorials ever named the woman who waited for him, fed his children, sewed his shroud. But their fingerprints are everywhere. On the patched coats, on the boots that were resoled 3 times, on the crusts of bread that made it to the front lines, and perhaps most profoundly in the future generations, because the children of this era grew up with fathers who vanished or returned shattered. They were raised by women who had no time for softness, only grit. And those children shaped by grief, silence, and strength became the workers, revolutionaries, artists, and thinkers of the 19th century. The legacy of Napoleonic women is not one of poetry. It's one of resilience. And resilience doesn't need monuments. It leaves scars instead. Scars passed down in stories, in habits, in the bones of families that refused to vanish even when the empire that abandoned them did. But what of the emperor himself, the god of thunder on horseback, the man who made kings tremble and poured dreams into cannon barrels? If women were the backbone, Napoleon was the brain, the myth, the volcano at the center of it all. He was small. Let's get that out of the way. Not unusually small by the standards of his time 5'6" to 5'7", which was average for a Frenchman of the late 18th century, but history made him smaller to make sense of his immensity. They had to shrink the man to fit him inside a story. But the men who followed him didn't see a little man on a horse. They saw a force of nature. They saw the god of war. Napoleon Bonaparte didn't just command armies, he reshaped time. His name alone suspended ordinary logic. He made things move. Kingdoms, borders, clocks, morality, language. And for those who fought under him, he wasn't merely a general, he was a myth made flesh. To understand this, you have to understand what came before him: chaos. The French Revolution had blown the world apart. Guillotines worked overtime, faith was outlawed, bread was gone, gold vanished, The streets reeked of fear and rot. Kings watched their cousins beheaded. Peasants watched their children starve. And out of that storm came Napoleon clear-eyed, organized, ruthless, brilliant. Where others hesitated, he charged. Where others begged permission, he seized power. He didn't wait for a crown. He made and placed it on his own head. At his coronation in 1804, Pope Pius VII stood ready to anoint him in traditional fashion. But Napoleon took the crown and crowned himself in front of the church, in front of God, in front of everyone. The message was clear. No one made me, I made myself. And to the broken, the lost, the hungry, this wasn't arrogance, it was salvation. Here was a man who didn't play the game. He rewrote it and then won it. Over and over again. In Italy, he turned a ragged force into an unstoppable spearhead. In Egypt, he brought scientists with his army and carved his name into obelisks. In Austria, Prussia, and Spain, he ground ancient monarchies into dust. Even his enemies admired him when they weren't terrified of him. Wellington called him the greatest general of all time. And Goethe, the German poet, said that when he met Napoleon, he felt he had stood before a god, but gods demand sacrifice. And Napoleon was no exception. His charisma was matched only by his hunger, his need to conquer, to define the age in his image, to sculpt Europe from blood and ambition. His troops, your troops, were his chisel. They adored him, or said they did. They cheered when he rode by on his white stallion. His presence in a battle could change everything. Men fought harder, marched farther, endured more when he appeared. They called him Le Petit Caporal, Little Corporale, nickname that made him seem humble, close, one of them. But he wasn't. Not really. He was an emperor, surrounded by gold, fine silk, and carefully staged portraits. He had dozens of palaces, tailored uniforms, command over millions. He read voraciously, rarely slept, dictated multiple letters at once, and expected instant obedience. When he spoke, the room went quiet. When he entered, people rose. He demanded loyalty, brilliance, and total control. And he got it. Because what he offered in return was not just pay, or food, or victory. He offered immortality. To die under Napoleon was to be part of something eternal. And for the poor, the forgotten, the otherwise disposable, this was intoxicating. He gave medals, he remembered names, he visited the wounded, he shook hands, even with the dirty and bleeding. And the stories grew, that he never forgot a face, that he could fire a cannon, that he could quote Caesar and beat a man at chess in the same breath. Even when the stories were lies, they stuck. He was branding before branding existed. He understood image. He understood narrative. And yet, he wasn't a cold, distant tyrant. He wept at funerals. He sent letters to soldiers' families. He remembered birthdays. He truly believed in France just as a nation, but as a destiny, to spread order, to bring law, to uplift the common man. And this contradiction is what makes him so hard to define. He was both liberator and dictator. He brought modern law, but also censorship. He made Jews citizens, but crushed dissenters with iron. He gave France stability and plunged Europe into 15 years of war. He created systems still used today and left millions dead in the process. So was he a villain? A hero? A god? A man? Yes. He was all of it. And the soldiers? They didn't always love him, but they obeyed him, even in defeat, even in agony, even when marching through Russian snow, starving, freezing, their brothers dying by the hundreds every day. They still whispered his name like a charm. Napoleon. Because sometimes belief isn't logical. Sometimes it's survival. And belief in Napoleon gave purpose to pain, made death feel noble. And that belief manufactured, or earned it, what turned a Corsican artillery officer into the most feared name in Europe. But belief and blood only take you so far. Empires are not built on dreams alone. Next, we look behind the curtain at the machinery that made Napoleon's wars possible. The trade, the labour, the economy that fed the furnace of history. Empires do not run on bravery alone. They do not rise on spirit, on poetry, or even on belief. They rise on coin, on sweat, on stolen grain, on balance sheets dipped in blood. For all the marching and saluting, the cheering and dying, Napoleon's empire was not a miracle. It was a system. And like any machine built to devour the world, it needed fuel in endless supply. So behind the thunder of cannon and the roars of Vive l'Empereur stood a quieter beat, the clink of coins, the shuffling of ledgers, the screams of overworked horses pulling overloaded carts through rain. They called it La Grande Armée, a colossal force, sometimes numbering over 600, 0 men, spanning multiple nations, speaking multiple languages, fighting under one name. But to move an army that size, feed it, arm it, pay it, that required a miracle of its own, or a mountain of debt. Often both. Napoleon's campaigns were unthinkably expensive. He inherited a France already broken by revolution, its currency destroyed, its credit annihilated, its aristocracy scattered or guillotined. And yet, within a few years, he transformed it into the dominant military-industrial power of Europe. How? Through brutal innovation, relentless conscription, ruthless taxation, clever theft. Let's start with the most basic ingredient of war: men. France's manpower was drained by near-constant fighting from 1792 onward. To refill the ranks, Napoleon introduced the levée en masse conscription on a national scale. Every able-bodied man between certain ages could be called to serve. The draft was not optional. Dodging it could mean prison. In some cases, death. You could buy your way out if you were rich, hire a replacement, bribe a clerk. But for the poor, it was a death sentence they couldn't escape. Entire villages were emptied of young men. Sons were marched away before harvests. Fields went untended. Families crumbled. Next came supplies. The army needed food, gunpowder, uniforms, boots, tools, wagons, tents, lanterns, maps, paper, ink, inkstands, horses, tack, medical gear, and coffins. Lots of coffins. France could not produce it all. So it took. Napoleon's forces lived off the land, meaning they stole from it. As they swept through Europe, they looted grain, wine, livestock, textiles, gold, salt, sugar, and even church bells to melt down for cannon. His bureaucrats followed behind the infantry, cataloguing resources, assessing taxes, requisitioning materials, demanding payments. In Spain, Italy, and the German states, this became known as la contribution, a polite term for state-sponsored pillage. Entire economies were reorganized to serve the war effort. But even theft has limits. So France borrowed, heavily, war bonds, emergency loans, tax hikes. Napoleon centralized the treasury and created the Bank of France, a national institution designed to stabilize the post-revolutionary economy and funnel capital into the war engine. It worked barely. The currency stabilized, inflation slowed, trade returned, but it came at a cost. The common people, especially peasants and urban workers, bore the brunt of it. Bread prices soared, riots flared, farmers were taxed dry. Workers were conscripted into arms factories, sewing uniforms 14 hours a day for barely enough to eat. Labour became a form of national service. Patriotism wasn't optional, it was baked into your job description. If you were a blacksmith, you shod horses for the cavalry. If you were a tailor, you stitched shako covers and greatcoats. If you were a child, you swept the floors of the powder mills and died young from phosphorus poisoning. France became a war machine, its people parts. Meanwhile, the slave colonies kept feeding the engine. Even after revolutionary France briefly abolished slavery in 1794, Napoleon reinstated it in 1802. He needed sugar, needed cash. The Caribbean plantations, especially Saint-Domingue, Haiti, had been France's wealthiest colonies. Napoleon could not afford to lose them. So he sent an expedition to crush the slave rebellion. It failed spectacularly. Tens of thousands of French soldiers died in the jungles, their bones swallowed by heat, disease, and brilliant Haitian resistance. France lost Haiti but held other colonies. And so, even as Napoleon spoke of liberty, his empire leaned on the backs of enslaved labourers, harvested products, and colonial silver. Trade, too, was weaponized. Napoleon's continental system, launched in 1806, was a massive economic blockade meant to starve Britain into submission. It forbade continental nations under French control from trading with the British. In theory, economic war. In practice, economic collapse for everyone. Merchants smuggled, ports stagnated, black markets bloomed, prices rose, allies grumbled, neutral nations were dragged into the chaos. The blockade hurt France as much as its enemies, but Napoleon refused to relent. Even as cities went hungry, even as ships rotted in dry dock, he stayed the course. Because for him, control over economy was control over destiny. He knew it, his enemies knew it, and they used it against him. In later years, Britain poured money into coalition alliances against France-funding armies across Europe to keep the pressure up. Gold flowed into Prussia, Russia, Austria, Portugal, and Spain. France, meanwhile, spent itself thinner with every campaign. By 1812, the strain showed. Boots ran out, salt grew scarce, horses died faster than they could be replaced. New recruits barely trainer-dented battle with rusty muskets and uniforms stitched from mismatched cloth. Even in the heart of the empire, rations were reduced. Farmers hoarded, workers deserted, the people murmured. And the army, the great, terrifying machine, began to cough smoke. Because all machines break. Eventually. But before the machine breaks, it dreams. It loves. It remembers. Next, we read the words of those who lived it not kings or generals, but those whose hands trembled around pens, who told the truth in ink, even when history tried to forget them. They were soaked in sweat, ink, wine, blood, and sometimes tears. They were folded carefully and carried across borders, rivers, mountains, and battlefields. Some were burned, some were hidden in boots, some were never sent at all. But when they survived, they told the truth. Not the truth of treaties or troop movements, but of longing, of lice, of hope, of silence. These were the letters from the front. In an empire where information moved slower than death, letters became everything. A thread to home, a whisper in the dark, a reminder that somewhere, someone was waiting. For many soldiers, writing home was a survival ritual. They wrote in fractured French, in broken Latin, in dialects long since extinct. They wrote even when they could barely spell, even when they had no paper. They scribbled on the backs of orders, on leaves, on spare cloth, with quills, with charcoal, with the last drop of ink. One such letter survives from 1807. A soldier named Etienne, writing from a muddy camp near the Vistula River. My dearest Elise, I miss the smell of your bread and the sound of our baby crying in the morning. Here we eat roots and meat of horse. When there is meat, it is cold always. I sleep beside dead men sometimes. Please kiss little Henri for me. I do not know when I will see him. I dream of your hair, always your hair. Tell your father I still have the watch. I will never sell it, not even for cheese. There's no reply in the archive. We don't know if Elise ever read it, or if Etienne ever made it home. But the letter made it, and that's something. Others wrote not out of love, but from fear that they would be forgotten, that their life would vanish in a ditch somewhere, their bones unmarked. One recruit wrote, Mother, if they tell you I died brave, believe half of it. If they tell you I smiled, know I was thinking of soup. If they say I died for glory, tell them I died for the man next to me. That letter was never sent. It was found folded inside a boot. Letters weren't just for the soldiers. Back home, women wrote in desperation, pleading for news, for money, for their sons to be released from service. Some wrote to generals, others to Napoleon himself. One woman's letter, addressed directly to the emperor. Sire, I beg you, my son has served 6 years. He has lost a hand. He cannot work. We have no bread. Please return him to us. I am old. His sisters are too young to marry without dowry. You are our father. Do not forget your children. Historians believe this letter was never opened, but some were. Napoleon was known to respond, occasionally, especially if the story served a purpose. He knew the power of mercy as propaganda, and still most letters went unanswered. Because war doesn't write back. Mail was slow, irregular, delayed by battle, by weather, by death. Sometimes an entire batch would arrive months late, the men who were meant to receive it already buried or missing. And still they wrote, because the act of writing was resistance. It was a refusal to vanish. Soldiers recorded details no newspaper ever printed. That a comrade froze in his sleep with his eyes open. That the wine they drank was laced with vinegar. That they could smell the enemy long before they saw themon-washed bodies, boiled cabbage, manure. That they once saw a man shot for trying to return home to bury his wife. That they missed the sound of roosters. That they missed having a name. Because in the army, names got lost. You became a number, a uniform, a silhouette in a muddy formation. Letters let you be human again, even if only for a paragraph. Some were obscene, filled with crude jokes, rhymes, rumours, laughter, even gallows, humour. I am sleeping beside rats larger than my sister's cat. Tell her she is missing out. If you send cheese, I will marry you, even if you're my cousin. I have not bathed since October. I fear I have become my own ecosystem. They weren't ashamed. There was no point in shame anymore. There was only the real. But over time, something darker creeps into the tone of many letters. A kind of emotional erosion, a weight. I cannot feel anything when my friend dies. I think my heart froze in Austria. Tell father not to pray for my return. I am not who he sent away. Sometimes I hope I get shot, not to die, just to sleep. And these are the letters that most clearly survived, not censorship, but time. Because the deepest truths are often written not for others, but for ourselves. Not all letters went to families. Some went to priests, some to old schoolmates. Some were confessions, final words, atonements. And some were never meant to be read. One letter, written in 1812 during the Russian campaign, was found decades later in a hollow tree outside Smolensk. This land is white and wide and hates us. I am tired. I have eaten parchment and snow. My friend was buried standing. His eyes froze open. I think God is angry. If this is found, I was named Louis. I loved bread. I am sorry. No last name. Just Louis. And bread. That's what remains of a man who once marched for glory. And so we return to the bigger question. What did it all serve? What empire rises from frozen fingers and unsent letters? What civilization walks over the graves of men like Louis and keeps going? Next, we look at the world Napoleon shook hand, how it struck back. It started in Paris, but it didn't stay there. Like all great fires, the Napoleonic Wars did not consume just one building. They engulfed the continent and then jumped oceans, crossed deserts, and unsettled places whose names Napoleon would never speak. This wasn't a war, it was a world event. Between 1803 and 1815, over 70 battles were fought, thousands of towns occupied, millions conscripted, and entire kingdoms redrawn or erased. France faced and sometimes commanded nearly every major European power. Austria, Prussia, Russia, Spain, Portugal, Britain, the Ottoman Empire, and dozens of smaller German and Italian states. All of them were dragged into the churning orbit of the man from Corsica. But Napoleon didn't just fight kings. He fought ideas. The Enlightenment had promised reason, equality, and justice. The French Revolution promised liberty and democracy. Napoleon promised order under his name, his law, his code. To some, he was a liberator. To others, a virus. Let's begin in Europe. In Italy, he smashed ancient principalities and created new republics. He tore down feudal privileges, burned corrupt archives, built schools. He also looted palaces, emptied churches, and dragged priceless art, including Da Vinci's works, back to the Louvre. In Germany, he shattered the Holy Roman Empire, a 1,000-year-old mess of duchies, bishops, and kings. In its place, he erected the Confederation of the Rhinear, modernized, secular federation that terrified the old monarchs. Germans began to imagine themselves not as Bavarians or Saxons, but as a nation. A dangerous idea was born. In Spain, he made a fatal mistake. He removed the Bourbon king and installed his brother, Joseph. But the Spanish people, deeply Catholic, fiercely proud, did not comply. They rebelled. And what followed was not war in the traditional sense, but a national breakdown village by village, house by house. It was called the Peninsular War, but it was really the first modern insurgency. French soldiers were ambushed by civilians. Priests led militias. Children stabbed dragoons in alleyways. In retaliation, French forces massacred entire towns. Historians call it the First People's War, and its brutality shocked even hardened generals. Spanish civilians were crucified, burned, executed in squares. In one village, a French officer ordered every male over 12 to be shot. The French called it pacification. Spain called it resistance. And Britain watched and bankrolled the war from afar. Through it all, the Royal Navy ruled the seas. Napoleon may have dominated land, but Britain commanded the oceans. They blockaded French ports, raided colonies, and armed Napoleon's enemies. The French continental system, designed to starve Britain by choking trade, ended up starving Europe instead. Black markets boomed. Prices rose. Grain rotted, all while the British economy surged on the backs of industrialization and slavery. In the east, Russia loomed. Napoleon and Tsar Alexander had once been uneasy allies, but by 1812, that truce was ash. Russia rejected the continental system, so Napoleon did what no general should do. He marched on Moscow. With over 600 men, the Grand Army advanced into the vastness of Russia. At first, there was no resistance. Cities were abandoned, food burned, the Russians retreated and scorched. Napoleon advanced, and when he reached Moscow, he found it empty and burning. He had conquered a corpse, and winter had begun. The retreat from Russia became a nightmare written in snow and blood. Horses died. Men froze standing. Carts snapped. Wolves hunted the column. Of the original 600, barely 100, crawled home. That loss cracked the myth of invincibility, and the world noticed. Prussia, Austria, Sweden all declared war again. In 1813, at the Battle of Leipzig, over 600, soldiers fought. The largest battle in European history until World War I, Napoleon lost. By 1814, the Allied armies were in Paris. Napoleon abdicated, exiled to Elba, a speck of an island. But the world wasn't done with him yet. In 1815, he escaped Elba, returned to France, and marched on Paris. Crowds rallied, soldiers defected to him. Within weeks, he ruled again, for 100 days, until Waterloo. On June 18, 1815, in the mud of Belgium, British and Prussian forces crushed Napoleon once and for all. This time, they sent him to St. Helena, remote rock in the Atlantic. He never escaped, never ruled again. He died 6 years later, lonely, bloated, and dreaming of his glory. But while Napoleon faded, his wars echoed. In Latin America, revolutions erupted as Spain's empire crumbled. Simón Bolívar, José de San Martín Both, inspired by France, arose against colonial rule. In the United States, fears of European entanglement spiked. The War of 1812 began partly in response to Britain's blockade system and conscription of American sailors, both influenced by Napoleon's conflict with Britain. In the Middle East, Ottoman rulers took note of French military innovations. In India, British forces, hardened by fighting in Europe, expanded eastward more aggressively. In Africa, French colonial plans were disrupted and reshaped. And in Europe itself, everything had changed. Napoleon was gone, but the ideas he carried could not be exiled. The Code Napoleon, with its secular laws and civil equality, spread to dozens of nations. The concept of meritocracy once radical, became mainstream. The modern state-centralized, efficient, nationalistic was born in his wake. But so too was something else. The blueprint for total war. Conscription, mass mobilization, industrial-scale logistics, propaganda, economic blockade, global reach. Napoleon was not the last to use these tools. He was the first. And every empire that followed, British, Russian, German, American, learned from his shadow. They studied his campaigns, read his letters, admired his boldness, feared his downfall. And so, though he lies buried beneath golden dome and stone in Paris, Napoleon never really left. But no world war burns forever. Eventually, the fire turns inward. Next, we watch the collapse. Not from enemies, but from the inside. Disease, hunger, betrayal, and the sheer gravity of human suffering that no empire can outrun. It didn't fall in one blow. Empires never do. They don't crash like towers. They collapse like lung slow, gasping inward. Napoleon's empire, once the heartbeat of Europe, began to bleed itself dry, not from the sharp edge of foreign bayonets, but from within its own skin. The signs were there, long before the world noticed. It began with the dead eyes. Marching columns no longer sang. Officers no longer gave stirring speeches. Medals no longer gleamed, they rusted. Men stopped shaving, stopped praying, stopped believing. And, when belief dies in an army, something far worse replaces it. Hollow obedience. The system kept moving. Orders were followed. Maps were drawn. But the soul had fled. In Russia, the Grande Armée had begun to rot. It wasn't just winter. It wasn't just hunger. It was everything. When Napoleon marched to Moscow in 1812, he brought with him over 600, 0 men, French, Italians, Poles, Dutch, Germans. It was the largest army Europe had ever seen. Only 1 in 6 would return. The roads were littered with corpses. They froze in marching formation. Horses died standing. Cannons were abandoned. Entire regiments vanished into white silence. It wasn't even war anymore. It was attrition by nature. Men went mad. Some stripped off their clothes in the cold, hallucinating warmth. Others slit open dead horses and slept inside them. Cannibalism was whispered. Maybe it happened, maybe not. But the fact that no one doubted it says enough. Disease spread faster than bullets. Typhus, dysentery, scurvy. You couldn't march a day without stepping over someone voiding blood into the snow. The Russians barely needed to fight. They just waited. Let the empire eat itself. And when the survivors stumbled back west, they brought the sickness with them. The returning soldiers were ghosts. The wounds didn't just stay in the body, they entered the system. Supply chains shattered. Tax bases crumbled. Napoleon scrambled to rebuild, but there were no men left. No horses, no metal, no grain. He began pulling younger and younger recruits. 15-year-olds, 14. Some couldn't lift a musket. He called them conscripts. Others called them children. The veterans sneered. The officers drank. The morale disintegrated. In Spain, the occupation spiraled into madness. French soldiers began executing entire villages just to make a point. Guerrillas retaliated with ritual mutilations, eyelids cut off, ears nailed to trees, genitals stuffed into mouths. Every hill became a grave, every peasant a potential assassin. It was no longer conquest. It was purgatory. Even at home, the ground was cracking. Bread prices in Paris tripled. Riots flared in Lyon and Bordeaux. Deserters robbed farms, gangs formed, armed beggars looted convoys. The police cracked down, public executions increased, gallows rose, stocks filled. Napoleon's censorship tightened. Newspapers became mouthpieces. Dissent was a whisper, then a silence. Those who once praised him now winced when his name was spoken. And yet, he fought on. He couldn't stop, because he was the empire now. There was no France without him. His image was printed on currency, carved into statues, etched into the minds of children. But even gods tire, and Napoleon was no longer sleeping. He developed stomach pain, possibly cancer. He became paranoid, snapping at advisors, pushing away allies. His eyes, once fire, dulled. He blamed others. The Russians, the Austrians, the weather, fate. Never himself. And then came the real betrayal. The Allies turned. Austria, his reluctant in-law through marriage, switched sides. Prussia, too. Even former clients, like the Confederation of the Rhine, began to rebel. They smelled blood. In 1813, at the Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of Nations, over 600, 0 troops clashed. Napoleon lost. Badly. Retreating back into France, he found a homeland that was no longer proud but frightened. His courtiers begged him to negotiate. He refused. Instead, he raised one final army barely trained, poorly equipped. They were boys and broken men, but they marched anyway. And still, France burned. Fields went unploughed. Furnaces ran cold. Women sold wedding rings for flour. The people who once shouted, "Vive l'Empereur," now muttered it with bitterness, "not at all." And then, in 1814, the unthinkable happened. Allied troops entered Paris. For the first time in over 400 years, a foreign army walked the streets of the French capital. And Napoleon? He was nowhere near. He was in the field, trying to hold the line. When the news reached him, something inside broke. He abdicated. Tried to poison himself, failed. And then, quietly, he left for Elba, Mediterranean island, with barely enough land to ride a horse. The empire was gone. Not toppled by invasion, not shattered by rebellion, but bled out slowly, like an old man cut too many times, in too many places. And what remained? A France exhausted, a continent scorched, millions dead, and the question no one could answer, what was it all for? But just because the empire fell doesn't mean the cruelty stopped. There were still debts to be paid, still punishments to be handed down. Next, we pull aside the curtain on justice, the military codes, the executions, and the cold iron hand that tried to hold a collapsing order together. The war may be over, but the boots are still polished. The uniforms still buttoned, the muskets still stacked. Because in the Napoleonic world, discipline wasn't a suggestion, it was a religion. And like all religions built on survival, its god was order and its devil was disobedience. You didn't have to be a traitor to be executed. You just had to be late, or drunk, or unlucky. Under Napoleon, military justice was swift, unapologetic, and depending on your rank selectively brutal. There were rules, yes, dozens of them, codified, clear, structured. Soldiers were tried under the Code Pénal Militaire, and by 1806, the bureaucracy of judgment moved almost as efficiently as the cannons. But the truth? There was no appeal. If you were accused of desertion in a forward position, even if you had just stopped to help a wounded friend, you could be shot on the spot, not by the enemy, by your own officer, executed in front of your unit, as a message. To keep the line from bending, Napoleon didn't invent this brutality, but he refined it, wrapped it in legalism, painted it with the same efficiency he brought to battle. And the punishments? Grim, calculated, terrifying. A soldier who stole rations might be tied to a wheel and beaten until unconscious. A man who struck an officer could be branded with hot iron, a letter burned into his flesh, D for deserteur, or V for volathief. Sometimes entire companies were punished for the crimes of one. Guilt is contagious, one colonel wrote in a dispatch. Even rumours could get a man flogged, or worse. The worst? Decimation. Not common, but remembered. When an entire unit was suspected of cowardice or mutiny, officers drew lots. Every 10th man was marched forward and executed by their comrades. They were forced to load their muskets and shoot the man beside them, who may have done nothing wrong. It happened only a few times during Napoleon's reign, but once was enough. The fear lingered, and fear kept the line together when food failed, when ammunition ran out, when hope bled into the mud. But what about the officers? They were tried. Towhen politics demanded it, usually after defeats. If a general lost too many men, failed to follow orders, or fell out of favour, he could be court-martialed, disgraced, imprisoned, even executed. But it wasn't just the battlefield where judgment struck. Civilian courts under Napoleon's regime were equally precise-aimed, equally ruthless. The Napoleonic Code, introduced in 1804, became the backbone of modern civil law across much of Europe. It introduced ideas like equality before the law, protection of property rights, the secular state, but it also tightened the leash. The rights of women were explicitly limited. A wife could not make legal decisions without her husband's consent. Adultery was a crime for her, rarely for him. Censorship was legal. So was forced conscription. So was imprisonment without trial in matters of national security. And religious freedom, officially recognized but heavily monitored. Napoleon struck a concordat with the Pope, restoring some church powers, but the state always came first. Priests could be jailed, sermons censored, church bells silenced. In the colonies, justice was even more grotesque. After reinstating slavery in 1802, Napoleon sent fleets to crush uprisings. In the Caribbean, rebels were executed en masse, some by hanging, some by fire. Others sealed into the holds of ships and drowned. These weren't war crimes in his eyes. They were policy. Disobedience, especially from the enslaved, was met with systemic annihilation. And all of it documented. Because Napoleon loved paper, he built a legal bureaucracy so dense it would take armies of clerks to manage it. Every arrest, every sentence, every lashing logged and filed. Justice was not blind. It wore a uniform, and it was watching. There were moments of mercy. Napoleon, famously, pardoned some deserters who returned to the ranks voluntarily. He commuted a few sentences when doing so served morale. He wrote letters to families, ordered pensions, remembered names. But those were exceptions. Fear was policy, because when your empire is cracking, when your coffers are empty, and your enemies are many, fear is cheaper than food. And so the machinery of punishment kept running even as the war sputtered to its end. Even in 1814, with Paris surrounded, French police hunted dissenters. Dissidents were imprisoned. newspapers shut down, rumors of defeat were crimes. Clerks were told to burn files if the Allies arrived. Because justice, like the empire, couldn't survive exposure. It only worked in the smoke, behind walls, with uniforms, with silence. But silence never lasts, and judgment, however brutal, cannot kill memory. Next, we look at what remains, what this era left behind, not just in land or law, but in the shape of our modern world. The smoke cleared. The soldiers stopped marching. The cannons fell silent. And France, battered and bruised, opened its eyes in a world it had set on fire. It was not the same world, and it was not the same France. The Napoleonic era had begun with a revolutionary spark and ended in exhaustion, a continent groaning under the weight of dead sons and broken promises. But like any inferno, it left behind more than ash. It left behind architecture, not just of buildings, but of law, of identity, of the modern state. France was remade in fire, and so was the world around it. Let's begin with the bones, the Napoleonic Code. First drafted in 1804, it was one of the most influential legal documents in human history. Its structure, logic, and clarity were revolutionary. It took law out of the dusty hands of nobles and theologians and gave it to the state, secular, centralized, written. It eliminated feudal privileges. It standardized contracts, property rights, inheritance laws. It declared all male citizens equal before the law, though not women. And while it reinforced patriarchal norms and left many injustices intact, it created a legal foundation sturdy enough to be adopted and adapted across the world. To this day, the Napoleonic Code forms the basis of civil law in over 70 countries, from Belgium to Egypt, from Latin America to parts of Africa. It was order from chaos, written by bureaucrats in the shadow of revolution. But Napoleon didn't just build law. He built infrastructure. He created a national bank, centralized tax system, and state-managed education network. Before him, schooling was the business of priests and elites. After him, France had lycée, government-run schools to train citizens and officers alike. Education became part of the state's identity, and that identity was national. Before Napoleon, most people in France didn't even speak French. They spoke Breton, Provençal, Occitan, Flemish, Basque. Napoleon's reign spread standardized French, taught in schools, printed in papers, shouted in parades. The state became a single voice, and it spoke in one tongue. Nationalism had arrived. And it didn't stop at France's borders. In Germany, his wars helped awaken a sense of shared identity among the fractured states. In Italy, his puppet kingdoms sowed the seeds of unification. In Poland, his promises of independence, even when broken, lit fires that would burn for generations. He made borders bleed, and from those wounds, nations emerged. He also changed warfare permanently. The Napoleonic model of conscription, mass armies, supply depots, and coordinated strategy was studied in every military academy in the world. His campaigns were dissected by Prussian officers, copied by Russians, feared by the British. Even American generals would echo his tactics a century later. He turned the battlefield into a laboratory, and his results rewrote the manual. His use of propaganda, too, was ahead of its time. He knew the power of image, of narrative. He controlled the press, commissioned portraits, rewrote bulletins. Even in exile, he worked to shape the story of his life. And it worked. Within a few decades of his death, he was already a legend. Victor Hugo would mourn him. Historians would fight over him. The French would romanticize him. By 1840, his remains were returned to Paris in an opulent ceremony. Thousands wept as his coffin passed under arches he had once ordered built. The man who had once marched through Europe in boots caked with blood now rested under the golden dome of Les Invalides in a tomb of red porphyry and green granite. A god of war, buried like a pharaoh. But his legacy wasn't just institutional or mythic. It was also human. Napoleon's reign changed what people expected from government. They expected service, efficiency, security, uniformity. The modern bureaucratic state, though cold, sometimes cruel, often distant owes its birth to the machinery Napoleon refined. They expected meritocracy, however flawed. His claim that any man could rise by talent, not birth, stuck. It wasn't always true. But it became the ideal, and ideals shape civilizations. They expected identity. The tricolour flag, the anthem, the civic calendaral part of a new way of belonging that didn't rely on blood or God, but on the idea of the nation. That idea has been used to liberate and to oppress. But it started here, in the churn of revolution, in the mud of Austerlitz, in the frost of Moscow, in the handwriting of a man who once called himself the revolution on horseback. He was not a saint. He was not a devil. He was a hinge in history. And even now, when you look at a map, or walk through a courthouse, or study at a state-run school, you are living inside the systems he helped forge. But we're not done. Not yet. One last step remains, not into the past, but across time. Next, we face the echo, the lesson, the fragile beauty of human resilience in the face of all this pain. So now the uniforms are folded, the banners furled, the drums silenced. Napoleon is gone, and the men who bled for him, boys who sang into the smoke, mothers who waited by cold hearths, peasants who marched and froze and vanished are long buried beneath roads and parking lots and stadiums. But listen closely. They haven't left. They're still here. In your bureaucracy, in your last name, in your legal forms, and your school schedules, and the way your country sings to itself on holidays. Because history doesn't end, it echoes. And the Napoleonic era, for all its brutality, all its contradictions, left a frequency in the human soul that still hums. A warning, a promise, a question. What are we willing to suffer for meaning? What are we willing to follow, and who are we willing to become? Because make no mistake, this was not a story about one man. It never was. Napoleon's ambition may have lit the fire, but the real fuel was human longing. The longing to rise, to matter, to make sense of suffering. That's why men marched 40 miles on rotting feet for half a turnip and a handful of powder. That's why mothers stitched uniforms for children who wouldn't live to drink wine. That's why a soldier in Poland, bleeding through a frostbitten sock, still whispered, "Vive l'Empereur," as he died. Not because they were fools, but because they were human. And being human means needing something larger than pain. Something larger than the cold, and the hunger, and the fact that history never remembers your name. We don't live for kings anymore, but we still live for stories, for ideas, for flags, for systems, for heroes with polished words and good posture who tell us we're part of something bigger than the blank days of survival. The men of Napoleon's army lived this truth raw, with no distance, no irony, just dirt and blood and prayer and loyalty. They believed, and when belief failed, they endured. That's the real legacy. Not empire, not law, not artillery manuals or economic systems, but resilience, the refusal to vanish, the audacity to survive mud and war and betrayal, and to still sing, still write letters, still love, still hope. Even when you're buried ankle deep in a Russian snowfield beside men who don't remember your name, even then, that's what we inherit. Not their uniforms, not their politics, but their fire and their questions. Who do you follow? What do you serve? What kind of world would you bleed for? We often tell ourselves that we are better now, kinder, smarter, more civilized. But if history whispers anything to you in the dark, it's this: we're not so different. We still build systems that ask people to suffer for invisible rewards. We still lionize leaders who speak in thunder, even when their footprints crush us. We still treat exhaustion like virtue, and grief like weakness. And yet, we also still reach for meaning, still try to make beauty out of ashes, still write letters home when we're scared, still sing under our breath when no one is listening. And that means we haven't lost everything. That means maybe we've learned something. So tonight, as you drift further into rest, let yourself hear the voices beneath the cannons. Not the generals, not the kings, but the forgotten ones. The drummer boy with blistered hands, the woman waiting beside an empty chair, the prisoner who wrote a name in the dirt just to remember he existed, the man who died for nothing and knew it but still whispered his mother's name before he went. Let them speak. Not so you'll pity them, but so you'll remember them. So you'll see them not as statistics or costumes, but as people just like you, hungry, hopeful, terrified, alive, and above all, worth remembering. Good night, soldier. Good night, France. Good night, history. We are still listening